up there, a time when smiling at strangers was obligatory, and so Ellie smiled anyway. She smiled at the busker who was playing It's a Wonderful World on his guitar in one of the underground tunnels, and she smiled as she travelled all the way up the escalator at the people travelling all the way down on the other side, her fiddle case lifted, as though she was Poseidon rising out of the stormy sea. As she stepped off the escalator, Ellie was pleased to see that Paddington railway station was not mobbed. The Salvation Army Band were just arriving at the final bars of The Lord Bless You and Keep You, and as she stood in the middle of the atrium and turned full circle to take it all in, Ellie realised that the spirit of spring had not only filtered into her own little soul this evening, but had also descended upon the whole station. It was as though she had stepped through the wardrobe into Narnia and felt that the very air around her, usually so electrified and frenetic in London, was softer somehow, giving the same sense of muffled peacefulness that a soft, warm breeze flowing through the leafy London streets brings. "And all is calm," she said to herself, confusing spring with Christmas somewhat, but it didn't matter. "And all is bright." Ellie was particularly excited tonight as she was travelling to Cornwall, but the real excitement came because she wasn't catching any old train. Tonight she was catching the sleeper train, also known as the Cornish Riviera, which travelled all the way from London to Penzance, where the pirates came from. Tonight's trip was marketed as a themed evening of travel into the nostalgic and bygone age of the 1940s. In other words, a Vera Lynn-themed fancy dress party and booze-up. Ellie adored 1940s style and music, but she worried that she might perhaps feel even lonelier and more self-conscious tonight, likely being the only single person at a busy event. No matter. Travelling by sleeper train to Cornwall was something that had been at the top of Ellie's bucket list for ages. Some years before, a friend of her great-granny Nancy's had bequeathed a cottage in Cornwall to Nancy in her will. This little cottage, in a pretty fishing cove in the farthest reaches of the county, was surrounded by wild countryside and stood with its toes resting on a cobbled slipway that ran gently down to the sea. It was the place where Ellie had spent much-loved family summer holidays, for which they'd all been so very thankful. And there was much for Ellie to be thankful for this year, which was why, much to her family's disappointment, and for reasons only comprehensible to herself, she'd decided that it was time to return to the cottage for a holiday, to finally have the particular adventure the great-granny Nancy had wanted her to have. And she would go on this holiday completely and utterly alone. But the train didn't leave for a whole hour yet, not until 7:02 p.m, which left Ellie free, now that the Salvation Army Band had packed up for the evening, to take out her fiddle, position herself upwind of Paddington Bear, who sat steadfast as ever on his bench near platform 1, and throw her hat, a vintage red beret, kept especially for such an occasion, onto the floor. She would fill the halls with the unmatched and absolute joy of fiddle music this evening. She would become Ellie Nightingale for one night only, something else she had always wanted to do. She took up fiddle and bow and realised that this, right now, at the beginning of the adventure, was one of those moments that marks a fabulous stepping-off point. She took a moment to savour this realisation before beginning her set with a reprise to her favourite movie of all time, Beauty and the Beast. Ellie had imagined playing her violin to a packed audience all of her life, albeit within the setting of a theatre, but you couldn't have everything, and wanted nothing more than to swaddle these busy passengers in good feeling. She put bow to string, paused a moment to settle, closed her eyes and began to play. And by the time she was 10 bars in, the whole of Paddington Station and every last Victorian iron rafter rang out with the good cheer that only a Disney theme tune can bring. Ellie Nightingale is a talented musician, prone to daydreams, exaggeration, and sudden lapses in concentration. This from her music teacher, Year 9. But truly, at the sound of the music, because for Ellie there was nothing more romantic and more fueled with empathy and emotion than the sound of a fiddle in full swing.